Hello and welcome to another GCSE Geography session, Learning from Home. This is the first session on the topic of changing cities, which you will find on paper 2. So we're just going to begin by showing an image of our fair city of Norwich back in the days of 1343, even before Mr. Lockley was born, believe it or not. And what you should recognise is a couple of structures here. This is Norwich Castle, and its motte, and Norwich Cathedral and St Giles Hospital. All of these structures still exist today and have lasted the test of time, as well as some remnants of the city walls. Cow Tower still exists today, but most of the city walls are gone. And these city walls represented the scale of Norwich, really, and everything within them was classed as Norwich. Now roll on just under 600 years, and this is what you'd find. Again, a lot more growth of Norwich. More buildings, bigger buildings, taller buildings, more definite structures, skating all the way around the castle as a kind of central focal point. And then if we look at Norwich just today, you can see just how much it's grown. This area here would have been the city walls, effectively. Everything within this would have been the beginnings of Norwich. And you can see it's spread outwards over time, and this gives you an idea of scale. You've got the castle there and the cathedral there. Now, this topic is all going to be focused on how cities change, like, for example, Norwich, but also why they change over time and the problems that might bring with it. But then we're going to focus on the management solutions to those problems. And the other thing we're going to be looking at is not just Norwich, so you don't have to just be bored about finding out about your home city. You also find out a lot about a contrasting city in a developing or emerging country. So we look at the city of Mexico, or Mexico City, in Mexico, which gives us a real contrast. Now, what's important to point out early doors is the difference between this term developed and the terms developing and emerging. Developed countries and cities in developed countries tend to be wealthier, and they're sometimes called more economically developed countries, cities in those countries. They tend to be wealthier, and when we talk about these ones, we are definitely referring to Norwich. Okay, developing or emerging absolutely only refers to Mexico City. So in an exam, you may well be asked to talk about a developed country. City, a developed country's city. If you don't talk about Norwich and you talk about Mexico City by mistake, you will get no marks for that particular section. So it's absolutely vitally important that you refer to Mexico City if it says developing, and Norwich City if it says developed. So just be mindful of just that last little part of the word is really, really critical when it comes to exam questions. So the reason we look at a developed city and a developing city is there is big differences, or some differences anyway, in how they've grown and the rate of growth and some of the problems that they each face. Okay, so I'm just going to give you an overview of what's included in this topic as a whole, and then we're going to move on to the first part. So urbanisation, we're going to look at that in emerging and developing countries in general, and why it's happened and what the problems might be, but just to get you an idea about this word urbanisation and what it means. Then we're going to look at reasons why urbanisation occurs in different rates and at different times in the different cities that we find around the world. We're going to look at the UK as a focus and how the population of the UK is distributed unevenly, and why, for example, more people cluster in the UK in certain parts of the UK. So, why don't all the people in London that's sort of busy and crowded spread out a bit further? You're going to look at the reasons why that's the case. You're going to look at the amount and rate of UK's urbanisation historically and today as well. And then we're going to focus in on Norwich specifically. Now, all the aspects of Norwich we're going to cover, we're going to do in little bite-sized chunks, and there's lots of key terms here which might scare you for now. But don't worry, we will cover them bit by bit, and they will eventually just filter into your psyche. So we're going to look at the site and connectivity of Norwich, its urban structure, these three terms: urbanisation, sub-, counter and re-urbanisation, migration, deindustrialisation, decentralisation and inequality. Again, don't be scared, we will cover these. Retail changes and sustainability. And we're going to look at a detailed case study of a major city in an emerging country, and that is Mexico City. So again, it includes very similar things to Norwich, but when it comes to the rapid growth of Mexico City, which is different to Norwich, which has been a bit more slow in terms of its growth rate, that comes with problems such as pollution, housing problems, employment problems, and inequality as well, but to a different scale and to a different extent. So there are differences between the two case studies which we need to be aware of. So let's start with this particular copy and complete for you to do. What I'd like you to do is, you know the drill by now, copy and complete the two paragraphs using the words from the word box on the right. Pause the screen, get that done, and I will go through the answers for you when you're ready. Okay, so hopefully you've started this. Urbanisation is the first word, means an increase in the proportion of people living in urban areas compared to rural areas. That means like the countryside. An urban area is a built-up area such as a town or city. A rural area is an area of countryside. There we go, we got that one. As a country industrialises, the number of people living in urban areas tends to increase. The UK and many other MEDCs, more economically developed countries, urbanised during the 18th and 19th centuries in something we know as the Industrial Revolution. So if you know anything about that, then you're already onto a bit of a winner here. Okay, so make sure you've got the right answers and check. Now, this there is a YouTube clip here, okay, and I think that is saved onto 365, so please feel free to look at it or just type this one in. That represents this thing. Now, this is a graph that shows global population growth. So this line goes up nice and slowly as the population increases from the year 1000, and again a sort of a steady increase, even sort of more rapid increase from 1500 to maybe 1800, 1750, and then all of a sudden exponential growth. Okay, this J curve of exponential growth, and that is where the population really started to boom, the 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. And that was largely because of the Industrial Revolution. And what you can see is that rapid growth continued and continued and is then predicted to slow down, but keep going up. It's not going to go away anytime soon. It's still just slowing down from its previous rate as the Earth gets a bit more crowded. So what I'd like you to do is, using data, describe the pattern from that graph. So how does it change? And I would recommend breaking it up into different sections. So you've got a definite section here to maybe here, then you've got another maybe section here to here, then I'd talk about the J curve here, and then a final section here. So there's probably about 4 clear sections on this graph, which I'd like you to think about like a story. Read it left to right, give me figures, give me numbers, quote me dates, quote me approximate numbers of population in billions, and to describe how the world's population has changed from start to end, really. Okay, pause the screen to do that. Again, these graphs are on 365 if you want to print them off. Failing that, just do a quick sketch of one, that's fine too. Okay. So yeah, imagine it's worth 3 marks or 4 marks if you've got those 4 different sections. Okay, so hopefully you pointed out that there was slow and steady growth from the year 1000 to the year 1500 of, between, let's say 300 million to maybe 500 million. Then a slight increase in the rate from 1500 to 1750-ish up to nearly 1 billion. By around 1800, the population reached about 1 billion and then grew exponentially, is a great word, by the way, exponentially, if you use that fantastically, to today, with the population peaking currently at around 8 billion globally, maybe between 7 and 8 billion. The population is expected to continue to rise, but at a slower rate from sort of 2050 onwards, and by 2150 should reach about 10 billion. There we go. We've described that. We've used figures. We've mentioned how slow or steady or how fast it might have grown. That's a really good kind of summary of how to describe line graphs. Make sure you use that in future. Again, break it down into different parts about how the curve and angle of curve changes. Okay, so I'd like you to think about as well, if you if you found that easy, challenge yourself. Try and think about reasons for those changes in global population growth. Why, around 1800 to 1900, did it start to really rapidly increase? What major event might have happened around then, which we've already kind of mentioned a little bit? Why might it start to tail off towards the end? Okay, I'll let you think about that and then get back to me via email if you wish. Okay, so the story so far. In 2007, more people were living in towns and cities than in rural areas. That meant that place was more urban than not urban. Between 2015 and 2030, which is in the future obviously, the people in cities is going to increase from 3.8 billion to 5.1 billion globally. And most of that growth is going to occur in emerging countries because everywhere else, like the developed countries, it's pretty much already happened. So in developed countries, the growth of cities will be much slower because, again, they're already pretty much full to capacity. Now this shows you, this is a really good graph actually, it shows you the change or the difference between developed countries or the more economically developed world and the less economically developed world, so the developing countries, and just 1950 they were fairly evenly matched in their population in millions, and the populations have grown, and in the developed world they've grown sort of slowly, very steadily, whereas in the developing nations they're growing much more rapidly, and lots of those people are moving into towns and cities, and that's one reason really why the growth of those is far faster, and that can create some problems. So this is a good little activity to get you to expand upon your answers to make it a level 2 answer. So make it a more valuable exam-based answer. So getting the top grades is going to require you to do this on a regular basis without having to be told that in a lesson. So expanding your answers is really key. What I'd like you to do is copy each bullet point out and then complete it with a sensible add-on, with a sensible kind of extended answer. Do that, pause the screen, have a go, and then I'll give you some suggested answers if you're struggling afterwards. Okay, so hopefully you've copied these out now and given yourself some sensible answers. I'll give you an idea of whether you're right or wrong. Urbanisation took place in the 18th and 19th centuries. This is in the developed countries, by the way, just to point out, just refer to that last part, like Norwich. Urbanisation took place in the 18th and 19th centuries due to the agricultural and industrial revolutions. This meant that there were more jobs and better pay in the towns and cities, so people migrated there or moved there. 82% of the UK live in urban areas, but some people are now leaving urban areas because better technology like internet access means people can work from home. And actually this has been really useful under the COVID restrictions, that a lot of people have found that they can even carry on doing their jobs from home. Young people are sometimes drawn back to urban areas, which is called re-urbanisation, which happens because there is more entertainment that attracts them, including clubs and bars. Back in my youth, I was known to frequent a good pub, not so much a club, I'm not a very good dancer, but a pub, and what better place to go than the city when you've got lots and lots of pubs in a very small space. So I lived in the city for a number of years because I could walk in and do loads of stuff in the city which is designed for young people. Now I'm knocking on a bit. I've moved out of the city to the countryside because I'm not so attracted by that kind of lifestyle anymore. But young people obviously are often drawn into the cities for that reason. Okay, so there you go. That's just a lesson in expanding your points. It's just a bit of common sense often, but requires you to understand things and show your understanding, a better level of understanding. And that's why expanding your answers is going to be for those people looking at grades sort of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, okay, rather than those sort of peaking at a grade 4 maybe. Okay, so a couple more here, and this one now, though, relates to developing or emerging countries. So think about what you might expect to find in developing or emerging countries. Pause the screen and have a go with just a filler. Okay, there's one bullet point here, and I just want you to try and fill in the gap between the first and the last points. Okay, so pause the screen, have a go, and then I'll give you some suggestions. Okay, so you've copied it out, and hopefully you've put something in the middle like urbanisation in emerging countries is more recent and rapid urbanisation. This has led to differences from developed cities like development of shanty towns. Image to help you there. Lack of available jobs, issues with waste. Okay, all of these things are pointed out by the images below. Hopefully you got that. But all of these things happen as a result of rapid urbanisation, which is what we associate with developing and emerging countries. That's a really key distinction between urbanisation in the developed world and urbanisation in the developing world. It's far faster in the developing world, and that's leading to these problems. We don't get shanty towns in the UK. We do have a lack of available jobs, but not to the same extent. We have fewer issues with waste disposal, whereas you look at the cities in developing countries, you'll find these sort of things, like these are the favelas of Rio. Again, this just represents people out of work, and this shows you some of the waste issues in Mumbai in India, which again is a very rapidly developing emerging country. Okay, so the 15 fastest growing megacities currently, you will see, and this is why the population of the developing country cities is going to grow so much. All of these dots, other than New York and maybe a couple of other kind of small examples like Tokyo, are all found in what we'd class as developing countries. So you've got Los Angeles as well there, but Mexico City, one that we're going to look at massively, you can see it's grown by 25%. In these sort of years, or is predicted to grow up to 2025 by 25%. Huge growth. All of these three cities in South America, Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, and Rio de Janeiro, again, huge growth. A lot of them are in Southeast Asia, so India and in China as well, where there's already been huge growth. You've got Beijing, you've got Shanghai, Manila in the Philippines, Calcutta, Dhaka, Mumbai, New Delhi, Karachi. All of these places are clustered together in sort of Southeast Asia, and this is where massive development is happening, and massive growth of urban areas is happening too. So why is it happening so fast in these developing nations? Why is it not happening as fast in the developed world? Two reasons, okay, and be aware of these reasons and make notes on these two as well as I talk, and pause the screen if I go too fast. The first reason is natural increase. So the birth rates are much higher than death rates, and so more people are being born than dying, and that means the population goes up. And as medicine improves and medical knowledge gets spread around the world, because we're a global world now, and cures to diseases and illnesses which normally would have reduced the level of population growth, as more people survive and survival rates increase, that leads to massive growth of populations, while that country still maintains a high birth rate. Eventually, their birth rates will decline and become like the UK, which is very, very much lower now than it was. In fact, most UK families are normally they have less than 2 children now, whereas before, even just 20 years ago, it was over 2 children on average per person or per family. The second reason, and this is probably the most noticeable factor, is migration. And we're not talking about migration from country to country. We're mainly talking about migration within a country, from the countryside, the rural areas, to the urban areas. So people moving away from the countryside into the towns and cities. And again, that's happening hugely fast in developing and emerging countries for a variety of reasons, which we're going to look at. Now, those reasons we call push and pull factors. And pull factors is easy. If someone's got pulling power, okay, if they're a good-looking person, they might have certain things about them. They might be a very good dancer. They might be really funny. They might have good hair. They're all reasons that attract people to them. Cities have pull factors. They've got things that attract people to going to them, like jobs, money, better chance for an education, more reliable income, rather than from the countryside, which pushes you away, because if you get a bad harvest, you don't eat or you don't make money. You don't have schooling facilities. It's not as easy to access hospitals, etc. So push and pull factors are really key. So push and pull factors, you can see, so push factors are bad things that make you want to move away from a certain place. So again, useful as a key term, it pushes you away. And a pull factor is a good thing that makes you want to move to a certain place. The benefit of a push and pull factor is if you have to do one, a pull factor is the opposite. So push factor, unreliable work. Pull factor, reliable work. Push factor, lack of access to education. Pull factor, good access to or better access to education. So push and pull factors are the opposites of one another, really, and each of them determines why people move to the urban areas away from the rural areas in the developing world. So again, you've got some factors which are push factors, few jobs, conflict potentially, but that's more kind of a global countrywide migration factor. Famine, natural disasters, again, all of these would be kind of large-scale global reasons to move from one place to the other. But internally, in a countryside, you might also find there's few jobs, less reliable income, less access to education and healthcare services. In the cities and towns, you often get better healthcare, better job opportunities, and maybe better money as well, education, even safety, because there's more policing. Although if it happens too fast, the policing maybe can't keep up, and that leads to another problem of crime. But more on that later on. So this is the world's megacities in 1950, and again, you can see lots of them you would find in the developed world: London, Paris, New York, Chicago, Tokyo, Osaka, all of these are in very much developed countries now. A couple in less developed world, like Buenos Aires, Calcutta, Shanghai. As we move on to now, these are now almost predominantly, other than, again, the exceptions of New York, LA, most of them are found in the developing world. So countries like Brazil or Argentina or China, India, they are places that are developing the fastest, and this is where the world's megacities are growing the most. 2014, again, you can see, so this one is just 2011, and 3 years later, just look at how many more megacities there are, how many more cities of over 10 million appear. It's a huge number, and again, look at where they're appearing. They generally are found in the developing world, so that is where this major growth is happening. So what are some of the consequences of this urbanisation in the developing world? We're going to, again, focus much more time on this in when we look at Mexico City. So you've got specific examples, but in general, we've got sort of 4 or 5 images here that depict some of the problems associated with it. So if you want to make a mind map or just a list, but I'll talk you through each of the pictures. So this obviously represents the of child labour, a lot of informal employment. If children move to the towns and cities, they might not be able to access education because the schools might not have room for them, and then they go into what's called informal employment, doing manual labour jobs for very little money and no protection. It can lead to massive congestion and air pollution as a result of that, which is linked here. So congestion, increased kind of safety issues on the roads is another issue and consequence of rapid urbanisation. Air pollution, you can see here, this is not smoke, this is not fog, it's a combination of the two. It's smog, which is as a result of pollution combining with thick atmosphere, and it makes for horrendous air pollution, and that creates obviously massive health issues for people in cities. And that's not exclusively found in the developed world. You'll find many cases of people in London who tragically have died because of complications around breathing difficulties and asthma and bronchitis because of the amount of pollution, even in a developed country like the UK. Crime rates are massively higher in a very urbanised city, especially in a rapidly urbanised city, because the police haven't got the time to haven't got the means to fully police all the migrants entering, and so as a result, you get little cliques developing, and you get inevitably some people taking advantage of that situation and developing crime gangs. And that happens, again, very largely in places like Mexico City, but also in other South American countries like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, etc. So you've got, crime that is a major factor. A lot of it is gang culture crime. And then another obvious factor, the development of shanty towns or slums or favelas. All of those things are known as informal housing. That means houses just built on land that people don't own out of whatever they can find. So the proper term for all of it is informal housing, but if you said shanty towns, favelas, slums, they're all very similar terms for the same thing, really. And this looks like the slums of Mumbai, which is one of the largest slums anywhere in the world. Okay, please just ignore that bell. Okay, so this is probably the best homework you're ever going to get, and I would urge you to watch it. I promise you, this is super, super interesting. This isn't saved on 365, but just search Andrew Marr's Megacities on YouTube, but this is the link you want really for that particular one. It's such an interesting series. There's about 3 of them. Just watch it, just to give you a sense of place about urban areas around the world and about cities around the world, megacities predominantly. And this, like I say, covers not just developed world cities, but also developing world cities too. Okay, hopefully by the end of this session or now, you've got a good idea about what we're going to be covering. Don't be daunted by those key terms, remember, and you've got a good idea about urbanisation and how it's changed over the years in the developing world and the developed world, and just an idea about what urbanisation is in general. Next lesson, we're going to be looking at a bit more specific stuff and breaking it down a little bit, so I'll see you next time. Well done for getting through it, and thanks for listening.